Step back! This fence belongs to me!
You're aiming heat at my wife, not the fence!
The flame hit the fence first, an angry blue-white streak hissing across the wood, before I even understood that Valerie Hensley was holding a blowtorch in her hand. My wife screamed my name, stumbling back as sparks spit toward her shoulder. The board chair didn't flinch. She stood there, chin high, one manicured finger tight on the trigger, like she was entitled to the fire she'd unleashed. "You're violating the height code," she snapped, heat swirling around her. "This fence comes down today." I stepped between her and Maya before the next blast of flame could reach her skin. My voice stayed low, but the shift was instant, the kind of shift you feel before the ground breaks open. "Valerie, you just discharged a flame stripper toward a human being. That's an assault recorded on my outdoor sensors." Her eyes flickered, not enough to show fear, just surprise that I had something she didn't expect. If you've ever felt that deep surge of power when you catch a bully slipping, stay right here and hit the subscribe button. She clicked the blowtorch off, but she didn't back down. The enforcer in crimson angled her shoulder, acting as if the scorch mark on my wife's shirt was an inconvenience instead of a crime. "You people think the rules don't apply to you," she said, "but I enforce them. That's my job." I kept myself steady, even as my adrenaline surged. "And my job," I told her, "was fire investigation for 12 years. I know exactly what that tool can do at close range." Her expression twitched, just a hair. She hadn't expected that. Nobody ever expects the quiet guy at the end of the cul-de-sac to have a resume sharp enough to cut through their arrogance. "Where are you watching from?" I asked the viewer inside my head, grounding myself as I turned toward Maya. Her hand clutched her shoulder, breath trembling between pain and shock. The scorch mark on her shirt sat inches from her collarbone. Inches! My throat tightened with a heat that had nothing to do with the blowtorch. This wasn't about a fence. It wasn't about property lines or code books or measurements. It was about the last piece of my brother's design, the fence he drew with me at our kitchen table before he deployed the final time. After we lost him, keeping that fence standing became a promise I wasn't willing to break. My wife tended roses along it every morning because it made her feel connected to him. Losing even a plank of it would have hurt us. But seeing her burn because of it, because of someone's lust for control, ignited something else entirely. The clipboard queen took another step forward, her voice clipped and righteous. "You were given a 72-hour compliance notice. You ignored it. I'm authorized to begin removal if a homeowner refuses. You're authorized to notify," I said, eyes narrowing, "not to discharge equipment stored under restricted HOA classifications." Her jaw tensed. Another tiny crack. She knew I knew. She also knew she wasn't supposed to even have access to that blowtorch without a licensed contractor present. Maya groaned softly. The sound tore through me. "Ethan, my shoulder." I steadied her with one hand, scanning the area. "We're getting you treated right now." The tyrant in heels raised her voice. "No one leaves until this fence is addressed. If you walk away, the fines double," and her sentence evaporated. A black SUV screeched to a stop beside the curb, dust spraying from its tires. The passenger door flew open before the vehicle fully halted. And there he was, Commander Jacob Turner, Maya's father. The man whose quiet presence could silence a room and whose rage, when awakened, carried the precision of a Navy SEAL with 20 years of deployment behind him. He crossed the distance between us in less than 8 seconds. His eyes swept the ground, the scorch marks, the blowtorch still dangling from the officer of rule's hand. "What happened?" he growled, not asked. Valerie actually stepped back. I'd never seen her retreat from anything. Maya leaned against me, breath shaking. "Dad, she burned me?" Something inside him went still. Deadly still. And when a SEAL goes still like that, everything around him begins to shake. The clipboard queen opened her mouth as if to defend herself, but no sound came. For the first time since she took office, fear eclipsed authority in her eyes. This wasn't a fence dispute anymore. This was the beginning of a war she'd started, and a war she would never be prepared to win. Commander Jacob Turner's shadow stretched across the scorched grass like a warning flare, and Valerie Hensley finally understood what she'd awakened. The enforcer in crimson tried to square her shoulders, but the blowtorch still trembled in her grip. She opened her mouth, probably to spin a rule, cite a code, or hide behind bureaucracy, but Jacob stepped in front of her so fast she actually gasped. "You burned my daughter," he said quietly. Quiet from a man like him was more dangerous than any yell. I guided Maya toward the porch steps. Her breathing stayed shaky. Every inhale clipped with pain, but she kept her eyes locked on her father. She trusted him. Everyone did. Even the neighbors gathering behind screen doors pushed them open an inch more, drawn by the gravitational pull of a man who'd survived war zones, but looked genuinely shaken now. The board chair swallowed hard. "It was an equipment malfunction," she stammered, gesturing vaguely to the still warm blowtorch. Jacob's brows lowered. "You discharged a flame tool toward a human being. That's not a malfunction. That's negligence." A few neighbors stepped farther out, forming a loose semicircle across the sidewalk. Not a mob, just witnesses, who'd been silenced long enough and recognized the moment something irreversible was happening. I rested Maya gently on the porch bench. Her shirt had begun to melt at the edge of the burn, fusing fibers together. I grabbed the first aid kit under the mailbox and held gauze against her skin. She winced but squeezed my hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." But I wasn't. Not when the fence, the line my brother designed, still smoldered. Not when the clipboard queen stood feet away, trying to act like this was administrative inconvenience instead of assault. Jacob turned slightly toward me. "Call the clinic, now." I already had the phone in my hand. Behind us, the tyrant in heels tried regaining ground. "Your wife stepped into active maintenance space," she snapped. "The HOA is within its rights to—" Jacob cut her off with a single step forward, his presence swallowing her argument whole. "You're within your rights to notify, to issue citations, to appeal. You are not within your rights to burn a civilian." Her lips parted, the sharp retort never forming. She wasn't used to anyone knowing the boundaries of her supposed power. She wasn't used to men who didn't fold under her tone. She definitely wasn't used to someone like Commander Turner. Two neighbors approached cautiously. One pointed at the fence. "We heard yelling," he said. "Then we saw smoke." Another added, "She's been threatening people for months. This isn't new." Valerie's eyes darted their way. "That's slander," she hissed. "This community has standards." "And you have a pattern," I said. The clipboard queen flinched. She wasn't expecting me to speak, not while Maya leaned against me, not while my hands were still shaking from the fear of what could have happened. "I know flame patterns," I continued. "I recognized the tool the second it sparked. You weren't maintaining anything. You were escalating." Her face drained a shade paler. Maya's voice broke softly. "Dad." "Ethan." She aimed it at me. Jacob inhaled sharply, his jaw locked, years of discipline tightening every line of his posture. He took one step closer to the officer of rules, and Valerie stumbled backward, her heel catching on the uneven brick path. "I'm calling emergency services," he said. "They'll take over from here." Panic flashed in her eyes. Real panic, not the performative kind she used to intimidate the neighborhood. "There's no need for authorities," she protested. "We can settle this internally. A misunderstanding like this—" "A misunderstanding?" A neighbor barked a laugh. "You almost set someone on fire." I wrapped my arm around Maya as sirens echoed faintly from beyond the lakefront. The sound traveled easily across the quiet community, growing sharper with each second. Valerie's gaze whipped toward the street, panic tightening her features as the noise closed in. "This isn't necessary," she tried again, her voice cracking. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said, rising fully. "You did." The enforcer in crimson looked around, as if searching for someone, anyone, to back her. But the neighborhood stayed silent. For the first time, she was the one standing alone. The sirens grew louder. Maya leaned her head against my shoulder, exhausted. "She really tried to hurt me," she whispered. I kissed her forehead and whispered back, "She won't get near you again." The first emergency vehicle rounded the corner. In that moment, as red lights washed across the lawn and splashed over the damaged fence, Valerie Hensley realized this wasn't going to be another HOA issue she could bury with paperwork or threats. This was evidence. This was assault. This was the beginning of accountability. And the neighborhood watched as everything she built on fear finally began to crack. The ambulance light splashed red across the cracked fence, flickering against the scorch mark where the blowtorch had kissed the wood. I held Maya's hand as the medic examined her shoulder, but my eyes kept drifting toward Valerie Hensley, who lingered near the curb like a shadow that refused to leave. The clipboard queen hugged her arms tightly, pacing in stuttered steps, caught between fear and fury. 2 deputies questioned her, pens tapping against their notepads. Every so often she glanced at the neighbors gathering along the sidewalk, but none of them looked away like they used to. Her power didn't stretch as far as she thought, not when flames and witnesses stood against her. Jacob remained by Maya's side until the medic adjusted the dressing. Only then did he straighten, his posture shifting into something trained, coiled, and assessing. His eyes scanned the yard, the fence, the blowtorch, the enforcer in crimson, the deputies, every piece of the scene, like he was locking it into memory. That's when I noticed him, the maintenance supervisor, standing half-hidden behind the HOA tool shed across the cul-de-sac. Daniel Ruiz, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders curved inward, eyes fixed on the ground. The conflicted witness. He looked like a man trying to disappear into the asphalt, but his gaze kept flicking toward Valerie, toward the deputies, toward the scorch marks, then away again. His breathing was fast, too fast, like guilt or fear, or both were crushing his ribcage. I stepped toward him slowly, giving him room. The last thing I wanted was to spook him. "Daniel," I said gently. "You saw what happened?" He froze mid-breath. His eyes darted toward the tyrant in heels. She was still arguing with one of the deputies, hands moving in sharp little gestures that screamed desperation. Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing once, twice, a small stutter in his throat betraying the war inside him. His voice cracked. "I was doing inventory." "You were outside," I said carefully. "You heard her shouting." He nodded, barely. When he looked up, it was quick, like an instinct he couldn't control, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable, not fear of me, fear of her. The officer of rules looked his way just then. Her eyes narrowed, a silent command, "Stay quiet." Daniel flinched, shrinking back half a step. That was his internal struggle, written in every twitch of his shoulders, every glance at her, every tremble in his breath. He wanted to help, but terror kept him on a leash. Jacob stepped beside me, arms crossed. "You don't have to protect her," he said to Daniel, voice low and steady. "Not anymore." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand. She controls everything here." His whisper was barely audible. "If I say anything, She already burned someone," Jacob interrupted. "There's nothing left for her to threaten." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the fence, toward the blowtorch the deputies had sealed, toward Maya sitting on the porch, fingers trembling even through the bandage. His breath hitched. Something inside him cracked, not all at once, not loudly, but enough. "I warned her last week," he whispered. "I told her that equipment wasn't safe, that she wasn't trained to use it. She told me to mind my position." He swallowed again, hard. "And she took it anyway." The clipboard queen's head snapped toward us. Her posture sharpened, stiffened, like she could sense the shift happening behind her back. She took one step forward, but the deputy lifted a hand, telling her to stay put. Daniel's face drained of color. "She's watching," he murmured. His hands trembled. "Let her watch," Jacob said. "Truth doesn't break under pressure." Daniel exhaled shakily. "She told me to mark the blowtorch as cleared, even though I told her it wasn't, even though it kept overheating." There it was, the first fracture in the wall of silence that had kept Valerie's reign intact. I lowered my voice. "Daniel, this matters. What you know matters. My wife was hurt. This wasn't an accident." He looked up at me for the first time, really looked, and behind the fear, there was a different kind of pain. Guilt. "I didn't think she'd actually use it," he whispered. "I didn't think she'd do that." Maya shifted on the porch. A soft wince escaped her lips. Daniel's shoulders caved inward, like her pain punched straight through him. "I can't protect her anymore," he breathed. And just like that, a decision began forming in his eyes. Not spoken yet, not fully shaped, but undeniable. Valerie sensed it. She took another step toward us, her tone cutting and sharp. "Daniel, a word. Now." He jumped, but he didn't move. He stayed rooted to the ground, torn between fear and the truth clawing its way forward. The first piece of resolve appeared in his posture. This was the start of his break from her, the start of her unraveling. The sun dipped lower behind the lakefront homes, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac as the deputies finished collecting statements. The medic prepared to load Maya into the ambulance, and I felt the weight of everything pressing against my ribs. But even as my wife winced through the pain, Valerie Hensley still tried to claw back whatever control she had left. The enforcer in crimson marched toward the deputies, gestures sharp and frantic. "You're not confiscating HOA property," she snapped. "That tool belongs to the association, not to you." The deputy calmly slipped the blowtorch into an evidence bag. "Ma'am, it was used in an assault." "It was an accident," the clipboard queen barked, but her voice cracked, thin, stretched, trembling in ways she couldn't hide anymore. One of the neighbors muttered, "Accidents don't aim." Another whispered, "She's finally slipping." The tyrant in heels spun toward them, fury blazing in her eyes, but the murmurs only grew. Her authority, built on threats, fines, and intimidation, crumbled one whisper at a time. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. She straightened her blazer, lifted her chin, and pointed directly at Maya. She interfered with official HOA maintenance. The fence is non-compliant. Her injury is a consequence of her own actions. I didn't move toward her. I didn't have to. Jacob stepped in faster than breath. The officer of rules actually stumbled backward as he stopped inches from her. "You're done talking," he said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was truth. She froze, jaw clenched, throat tight with swallowed panic. A fresh wave of neighbors stepped onto their porches, drawn by the commotion. More witnesses, more eyes, more people who finally saw the cracks in the facade they'd been too afraid to question. The fence behind me creaked in the breeze, edges charred where the flame had eaten into my brother's design. That sound, the soft, weakened groan, hit me harder than I expected. The fence wasn't just wood, it was memory, legacy, a piece of a man I'd already lost once. And she burned it. "Oh, she'll answer for this," Jacob muttered near my shoulder. "Just wait." A fire marshal's vehicle rolled onto the street then, red lights reflecting off the windows. Perfect timing. Valerie stiffened as he approached. Fire Marshal Briggs, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "What happened?" he asked. The deputies filled him in. His gaze traveled from the blowtorch to the burn marks, then to Maya's bandaged shoulder. His jaw tightened. "Who handled the tool?" he asked. Valerie stepped forward. "It was a sanctioned maintenance procedure." "Who handled the tool?" he repeated, harder. Silence stretched thick. Finally, she lifted one manicured hand. "I did." Briggs stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he exhaled through his nose, the sound tired, disappointed, and deeply unamused. "You used an open-flame stripping tool in a residential zone without a permit, without safety barriers, without certification." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He pressed on. "You're also in violation of city fire codes, county safety protocols, and state tool handling requirements." Her face drained. Behind her, Daniel Ruiz shifted again, nervous energy vibrating through him. His eyes flicked to Briggs, then to me, then back to Valerie. His internal battle resurfaced, the fear of what might happen if he spoke versus the guilt clawing through him for what he'd allowed. For now, he stayed silent, but not comfortably. Briggs scribbled something, then turned to me. "I'll need to inspect the HOA's equipment storage, tonight." Valerie practically choked on her breath. "You can't! That's private association property." He didn't even look at her. "Assault with an open flame gives me immediate access." Her composure cracked so visibly the neighbors actually leaned in. She pressed her palms against her thighs, fingers trembling. "This is harassment," she whispered. "No," Briggs said evenly. "This is the law." The crowd murmured again. Maya moaned softly as the medic adjusted her bandage. I squeezed her hand, whispering reassurance. But inside, something cold and clear crystallized. This wasn't an HOA violation anymore. This was a fire code violation, a safety code violation, a criminal negligence violation. And every one of those roads pointed to outside authority intervention. The one thing Valerie couldn't manipulate, silence, or bully. The clipboard queen watched as Briggs approached the HOA shed with a flashlight, deputies at his side. She took a shaky step after them, but Jacob blocked her path. "You go near that shed," he warned, "and they'll add obstruction charges." Valerie's breath caught. She didn't move. Across the yard, the fire marshal lifted the shed lock. The click echoed like the first crack in a dam. Something inside that storage space was about to change everything. And deep down, even she knew it. Fire Marshal Briggs swung the shed doors open, and the metallic hinges groaned loud enough to pull every eye toward the structure. The fading daylight couldn't penetrate the dark interior, so he clicked on his flashlight. The beam sliced across shelves, bins, and containers lined in cramped rows. I noticed Valerie Hensley stiffen instantly. The enforcer in crimson took one involuntary step backward, as if the light itself threatened to expose her. Briggs didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, deputies close behind him, their boots crunching against loose gravel. From where I stood beside Maya, who clutched my arm despite her exhaustion, I could already make out what he was seeing. Unlabeled containers stacked too close together, chemical cans without proper seals, and a row of flame tools that had no business. Being in a residential neighborhood storage, the clipboard queen tried to recover her posture, but her voice betrayed her. "Those items are for standard HOA upkeep, nothing unusual." Briggs didn't even glance back. "These are industrial grade, not residential, not legal." Whispers rippled through the watching neighbors. They leaned closer, drawn to the unraveling. Jacob kept himself planted directly between Valerie and the shed, his presence alone, an impenetrable wall. "Stay right where you are," he warned. The tyrant in heels clenched her jaw, eyes narrowing at him. She hated losing ground. She hated losing anything. But this was the kind of scrutiny she'd never prepared for. Briggs examined one of the flame tools, rotating it in his gloved hands. "This model requires certification to operate. Where's your certification, Ms. Hensley?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. We had a contractor last month who—" "Name?" Briggs interrupted. She blinked. "What?" "Name, license number, proof of contract." Silence. The officer of rules exhaled shakily, gaze dropping. It was the first time I'd seen her at a loss for words. Meanwhile, behind Briggs, a deputy crouched beside a stack of boxes. "Sir," he called, lifting a rusted container. "This label's been peeled off." Briggs's expression hardened. "That's a violation." A second deputy pointed to a line of scorch marks along the interior wall. "Looks like something overheated in here recently." My chest tightened. Overheated. That was exactly what Daniel had warned her about. I turned toward him. He stood several feet away, shoulders curled inward, hands gripping each other so tightly his knuckles whitened. He watched Briggs' flashlight sweep across the shed, every beam making him flinch. His guilt sat heavy on him, each discovery cutting deeper. I stepped closer. "You knew this was coming eventually," I said softly. Daniel swallowed, eyes darting toward Valerie. She stared at him like a threat wrapped in a glare. "That equipment shouldn't have been used," he whispered. I told her last week it was overheating. She said it was fine. She said not to question her. There it was, the confirmation of what I suspected, but needed verified. "Daniel," I said gently, "this is the moment. You don't have to protect her anymore." His breath trembled. "You don't understand. If I speak up, you'll save this entire neighborhood," I finished. His eyes filled with something raw, fear, regret, responsibility all churning together. Before he could answer, Briggs stepped out of the shed holding a large black binder. Not a document discovery, just the standard equipment manifest every HOA must legally keep in plain access for safety checks. He flipped through it, page by page, his expression darkened. "This log is incomplete," he said. "Entries are missing. Tool. Usage isn't recorded properly. Some pages have been removed." Valerie's face drained. "We had water damage," she blurted. "No, you didn't," Daniel whispered behind me. The words slipped out before he realized he'd spoken them aloud. Every head turned. The clipboard queen's eyes widened. "Daniel." He froze. She stepped toward him. "You will retract that." Jacob intercepted her instantly. "You'll do no such thing." Daniel stared at the ground. "There was no water damage," he said again, louder this time. "She told me to remove the pages." Gasps spread through the crowd. Valerie's mouth fell open. "You liar! Enough!" Briggs' voice cut through everything. "Ms. Hensley, step aside. I'm not done inspecting." Her hands shook, visibly. The truth wasn't just cracking now, it was spilling. Briggs turned to me. "Mr. Colwood, your expertise in fire patterns will be useful. I'd like your statement regarding the tool's discharge and burn trajectory." My chest tightened with a mix of anger and purpose. This was where my professional skill became the weapon she never anticipated. I nodded. "I'll help in every way needed." Valerie's breath caught. She finally understood what she was up against. Not just a homeowner, not just a Navy SEAL's son-in-law, but someone who could prove every inch of what she'd done. And the investigation had only just begun. Fire Marshal Briggs motioned me closer, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dim interior of the HOA shed. The smell hit immediately, burnt metal mixed with the sharp sting of solvents, and my training kicked in with a force that steadied me. This wasn't just carelessness. It was systemic negligence laid bare, and Valerie Hensley knew it. The enforcer in crimson stood outside the shed entrance, her arms folded so tightly across her chest, her knuckles blanched. She tried to hold her chin high, but her posture betrayed her. Every muscle was locked in a defensive tremor. Every breath came too fast. She wasn't in control of the scene anymore. Inside the shed, Briggs crouched beside a pile of tools. "You see this?" he asked, pointing at a scorch pattern on the metal shelving. I knelt beside him. Localized heat bloom, probably from an overheated igniter. This didn't happen once. It's repeated exposure. He nodded sharply. "Exactly what I thought." Behind us, the clipboard queen's voice cracked through the air. "You're twisting everything. Those tools are standard equipment." I didn't turn. Neither did Briggs. "Standard equipment doesn't leave burn signatures like this," I said. The deputy near the entrance smirked beneath his breath. Valerie's face flushed an angry red, but she bit her tongue. Maya watched from the porch bench, exhaustion etched across her features. Jacob stood protectively beside her, arms folded, gaze fixed on every movement Valerie made. The neighbors lingered, along the sidewalk, whispering, watching the tyrant in heels unravel piece by piece. Briggs stood, dusting his gloves. "Let's move to the north wall." I followed him deeper into the shed, using my own flashlight. The shadows twisted around unlabeled canisters and chaotic shelving. One container lay on its side, a dried streak of black residue skimming down toward the concrete. I crouched. "This is accelerant runoff, industrial grade." Briggs exhaled slowly. I was afraid of that. We walked further. The officer of rules hovered at the doorway, torn between retreating and trying to insert herself back into the investigation. "You can't cite us for storage," she snapped. "The HOA bylaws give us the right to keep approved equipment." "Approved equipment," Briggs interrupted, "must be properly labeled, properly logged, and properly maintained." "These are maintained," I raised my flashlight. "Then explain that." A scorch mark climbed the back wall, wide, irregular, a burn that had crawled upward before cooling. Not recent, not ancient. Maybe days ago. Valerie's gaze darted toward Daniel Ruiz like a knife. He shrank instantly. His internal struggle rippled through him again. Fear in his trembling fingers, guilt in his downcast eyes, panic in every shallow breath. He was the hinge of this investigation, and she knew it. She also knew he was close to breaking. Briggs rounded on her. "Ms. Hensley, when was the last time you inspected this shed?" She hesitated. That hesitation was everything. "I delegated that task," she said, "to maintenance." Daniel flinched like she'd stabbed him. Jacob stepped closer, voice low but sharp. "You threw him under the bus before he even spoke." The clipboard queen glared at him, venom returning to her tone. "He's responsible for logging and safety." Daniel swallowed, hard. "No," he whispered. "She made the decisions. I just followed them." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "And did you note concerns about safety?" Daniel looked at me. No, through me. Like he was begging for permission to finally tell the truth. I nodded once. That was all he needed. "I warned her 2 weeks ago," he said, voice trembling. "Told her the flame tools were overheating. Told her to take them out of circulation. She refused. She said the HOA needed to show authority." A ripple of shock swept through the neighbors. The tyrant in heels snapped, "You're lying?" "No, he's not. I interrupted. These burn patterns match exactly what he's describing. Briggs approached her slowly. Ms. Hensley, did you override a safety warning? She tried to speak. She couldn't. Her throat closed around the truth. The tension in her face fractured again, fear leaking through all the cracks she once covered with rules and threats. Behind us, Maya inhaled sharply, pain tugging her shoulders. Jacob steadied her. It's okay, he murmured. It's all coming out. Briggs closed his notebook. I'll need all parties at the county office tomorrow morning. This investigation is now formally escalated. Valerie's lips trembled. That's unnecessary. No, Briggs said. It's required. This was the moment everything shifted. The shed wasn't just evidence. It was the doorway to outside intervention. She wasn't just wrong. She was cornered. And she finally realized she wasn't walking out of this investigation untouched. The next morning arrived heavy and breathless. The kind of morning where the air itself felt like it was waiting for something to break. I stood outside the county safety office with Maya's hand in mine, her shoulder bandaged beneath her loose shirt. She moved slowly, but with more determination than I expected after what Valerie Hensley had done. Jacob remained glued to her side, silent, watchful, a storm caged behind calm eyes. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the scent of coffee mixed with disinfectant hovered in the halls. Fire Marshal Briggs had gathered everyone for formal statements. Deputies lined one wall, neighbors filled another, and in the center chair, stiff and shaking, but trying desperately not to show it, sat the enforcer in crimson. She wore a different blazer today, navy instead of red, but it didn't matter. Fear lived in her posture. Her fingers tapped rapidly against her knee. Her eyes darted from face to face, calculating every angle of escape she no longer had. But the real shift came when Daniel Ruiz entered the room. He walked in slowly, shoulders hunched, head lowered, as if the weight of yesterday clung to him. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. The clipboard queen saw him and straightened instantly, her jaw tightening. She whispered, "Daniel, don't forget who supported your position." But he stopped several feet away from her, didn't answer, didn't look at her. Instead, he looked at me, then at Maya, then at Briggs. The conflict inside him was unmistakable. This was the moment Part 7 required, the breaking point, the confession, the truth fighting for release. Briggs cleared his throat. Ms. Hensley, Mr. Ruiz, Mr. Colwood, we'll begin shortly. I helped Maya settle into a chair. Jacob stood behind her like a sentry. Valerie leaned slightly toward Daniel as the room settled. Say nothing unnecessary, she hissed under her breath. You're here to clarify the misunderstanding, not create drama. Daniel swallowed hard. His face tightened. His breathing hitched again, too rapid, too shallow. His internal struggle was alive, pulsing through every nervous shift of his hands. Briggs started with the basics: date, time, the initial confrontation. Valerie tried to redirect the narrative, painting the Blowtorch incident as an equipment malfunction and accusing us of inflaming emotions for personal gain. But the officer of rules didn't notice how. Daniel's breathing changed with every lie she told. With respect, she said, lifting her chin, Mr. Ruiz will confirm the tool malfunctioned prior to... No. The single word sounded small, but it hit the room like glass shattering. Valerie whipped her head toward him. Daniel! He lifted a trembling hand. No, I can't keep lying for you. The room fell silent. Briggs turned. Mr. Ruiz, go ahead. Daniel closed his eyes for a long second, grounding himself. Then the words poured out, not fast, not loud, but raw and irreversible. I told her the tool wasn't safe, he said. I told her it overheated. I told her it shouldn't be used near residence or property lines. His voice cracked. She said we needed to enforce compliance with authority. Gasps fluttered across the room. Valerie's face drained of color. Daniel, you are jeopardizing your... He stepped away from her, actually stepped back. I'm done being afraid of you, he whispered. That single sentence broke whatever grip she still had on him. Briggs leaned forward. Did she override your safety warnings? Daniel nodded. Yes. She said the HOA needed to appear firm. She said homeowners respond to pressure. She kept the blowtorch out even after 2 overheating incidents. Maya winced, her hand brushing her bandage. Daniel's voice shook harder. And when I told her the fuel lines were compromised, she told me to log them as cleared anyway. The clipboard queen slammed her palm onto the table. "You traitor!" Jacob stepped forward instantly, blocking her view. "Careful," he warned, "or they'll add intimidation." She froze. Briggs let the silence stretch before speaking. "Mr. Ruiz, your testimony directly supports the safety violations and negligence charges under review." Daniel lowered his head. "I know." "And you understand this will place responsibility on Ms. Hensley?" Another nod. "I'm sorry, but it's the truth." Valerie breathed out a broken laugh, disbelief twisted into denial. "You don't know what you're doing. You're ending your career. You're ending this neighborhood." "No," Daniel whispered, lifting his eyes at last. "You did." The tyrant in heels exhaled sharply, as if the words punched the air out of her. Her composure cracked down the center. Briggs closed his notebook. "Ms. Hensley, you are now under formal review for multiple safety violations and misuse of industrial equipment. You'll remain restricted from all HOA maintenance access pending further action." Her mouth opened. No sound emerged. The confession had broken her authority, and everyone in that room felt it. This was the turning point. The moment fear switched side, the hallway outside the inquiry room felt colder than the air conditioning could explain. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and every footstep echoed like the building itself knew something. Irreversible had happened. Valerie Hensley stood near the far wall, arms wrapped tightly across her chest. The navy blazer from earlier replaced by her signature red, almost as if the enforcer in crimson thought wearing authority might somehow restore it. But authority isn't a blazer. Authority is trust. And hers was gone. Maya rested beside me on a padded bench, her bandaged shoulders supported by Jacob's steady hand. She looked exhausted, but a fire lived behind her eyes, a quiet, enduring strength that kept me grounded. After Daniel's testimony, everything shifted. The clipboard queen was no longer the center of gravity. The room no longer tilted toward her voice. Even the neighbors in the waiting area avoided meeting her glare. That's when Briggs approached me with a folder tucked under his arm. "Ethan," he said, motioning toward an empty office, "I want to go over the physical evidence with you. Your expertise will help build a clear trajectory map of the flame." I nodded. "I'm ready." Maya squeezed my hand. "Go," she whispered. "Finish this." I stepped into the small office. Blueprints, photos, and tool diagrams littered the table. Briggs spread them out, pointing to the burn patterns on the fence. "Your wife was here," he said, tapping a marked spot. "The flame marks angle upward, not downward. That suggests intentional aim, not an accidental swing." My jaw tightened. "Exactly what I thought." "And the overheat blowback pattern on the tool," he continued, "matches 2 prior overheating incidents." Daniel confirmed both. I leaned in, tracing the scorch arc with my finger. "See this curve? That only happens when the wrist rotates intentionally during continued ignition. If she'd pulled back in panic, the flame dispersion would have widened, not concentrated." Briggs nodded, lips thinning. "The officer of rules insisted the tool malfunctioned, but what you're showing me proves controlled movement." Controlled, aimed, directed at Maya. A cold heaviness settled in my chest, slow and deliberate. "That's exactly why I needed your expertise," Briggs added. "This isn't just negligence. It's misuse of certified equipment with prior warnings ignored." Outside, a voice sharpened. Valerie's. "I'm not sitting here while you all fabricate a narrative. I've run this community for 8 years. 8, and every one of you benefited from my standards." Her words bounced off the hallway walls, but nobody moved toward her, not even out of pity. Briggs sighed. "She'll fight this tooth and nail." "She can't fight the evidence," I said. He nodded once, then motioned toward another set of documents. "There's something else. When I inspected the igniter mechanism on the blowtorch, I found residue inside the nozzle, residue that suggests the tool had been pushed past safe operating temperature repeatedly." My eyes narrowed. "She overrode the safety warnings." "Exactly." I sat back, the weight of what this meant sinking deeper. This wasn't careless. This was deliberate ignorance in the name of authority. Briggs gathered everything into the case folder. "We're preparing for the public review hearing tonight. You'll need to present your analysis, calmly, fact-based. I nodded. I can do that. He paused. Your calm is going to be what breaks her facade. When we stepped back into the hallway, several neighbors approached quietly. One whispered, "We're with you." Another added, "She can't run the board after this." Valerie heard them. Oh, she heard every word. The tyrant in heels snapped her head toward the group, eyes blazing. "You're all cowards. You let him manipulate you. He's twisting everything." But her voice trembled. The cracks widened. Jacob stepped between her and Maya. "You take one more step toward my daughter," he warned, "and the charges escalate." The clipboard queen froze, not because of Jacob's words, but because even Daniel, timid and shaken, stood beside him now. Not hiding, not folding, not looking at the ground. Valerie stared at him, betrayal etched across her face. "You... ungrateful?" "I'm done," Daniel said quietly. "I'm not covering for you anymore." She staggered as if the air had been knocked out of her. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The neighborhood's fear had moved. It no longer orbited her. It no longer strengthened her. It turned on her. Briggs clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight's hearing is where the real dismantling happens. Get ready." As he walked away, Valerie's gaze met mine. No rage, no authority, just the beginning flicker of panic, the kind that surfaces when someone realizes the power they abused is slipping through their fingers, and there's nothing left to grab. The evening sky over Lakeside Summit Grove burned in shades of orange and red, almost mocking the scorch mark still seared into the fence. Neighbors drifted toward the community center in quiet pairs, the energy different now, charged, restless, waiting for something long overdue. Tonight wasn't a routine HOA meeting. Tonight was a reckoning, and Valerie Hensley knew it. The enforcer in crimson stood at the entrance, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to hold her entire world together. Her eyes darted from face to face as residents walked past without greeting her, something unthinkable only days ago. Her authority, once unquestioned, now looked more like a costume she didn't fit into anymore. Jacob walked ahead with Maya tucked safely between us. His protective presence felt from yards away. Even injured, she held her chin higher than the clipboard queen ever had. Every step she took was quiet defiance. Inside, the community center buzzed with murmurs. Folding chairs filled row by row. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stress. Briggs stood near the front table with his case folder, flipping through documents with the calm patience of a man who held every card that mattered. "Ethan," he said when I approached him, "tonight we finalize the evidence chain. Your analysis goes first. Keep it factual, not emotional." "Understood." He lowered his voice. "She's going to lash out. Don't let it derail you." I glanced toward Valerie, now pacing near the stage in short, sharp steps. The tyrant in heels looked like a storm trapped inside a human shell. Her fingers twitched every time Daniel shifted in his chair near the aisle. The conflicted witness kept his hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor, his knee bouncing with anxious rhythm. He wasn't backing out, but the fear still lived in his posture, squeezed into every breath. Even now, he looked over his shoulder before speaking. She's watching me," he whispered as I passed. "You're safe tonight," I assured him. "Everyone's here. Briggs is here." He swallowed. Yeah, I know." But the tremor in his voice revealed just how deep her shadow had reached into his life. We took our seats near the front. Maya leaned toward me. "This is really happening," she whispered. "It has to," I said. The meeting started with Briggs stepping to the podium. "This session is to review the fire safety incident that occurred yesterday evening. We will go through evidence, statements, and recommendations for immediate action." Valerie shot up from her seat before he could continue. "This is a biased ambush," she shouted. "You're all swallowing his story without—" "Sit down, Ms. Hensley," Briggs said firmly, not raising his voice. Gasps scattered across the room. Nobody had ever spoken to the officer of rules like that, not publicly, not with absolute authority. Her jaw trembled. She sat, but not because she wanted to, because she finally understood she had no choice. Briggs gestured toward me. "Mr. Colwood, please present your findings." I rose, feeling dozens of eyes settle on me. I projected the burn pattern photos, the tool diagrams, the scorch signatures. Each point hit like a gavel landing. This curve, I said, tracing the path across the fence photo, is consistent with an intentional wrist rotation during ongoing ignition, not a reflexive flinch, not an accident. The clipboard queen shook her head violently. Lies, technical jargon, misinterpretation. Briggs silenced her with a hand. You'll speak when addressed. Her cheeks flushed deep crimson. I continued. Accelerant residue found inside the tool's nozzle indicates it was pushed beyond safe operating temperatures. Prior warnings about overheating were ignored, as confirmed by Mr. Ruiz. All eyes shifted to Daniel. His breath hitched, but he nodded. It's true, he said softly. She overrode all safety notes. She said we needed to make examples of the Colewoods. The room erupted. Gasps, outrage, whispered curses. Valerie shot to her feet, face twisted. You worthless coward. After everything Enough! Jacob's voice boomed through the hall. He strode forward, stopping inches from her. You burned my daughter. You endangered a neighborhood. If you want to scream tonight, scream into the badge of the man who's about to escort you out. Valerie faltered, her bravado deflating like punctured metal. Briggs nodded to the deputies lining the wall. Please note that Ms. Hensley is in violation of procedural conduct. Continue, Mr. Colwood. I finished the analysis, the evidence, the angles, the findings. The truth wasn't just clear, it was undeniable. When I sat, Maya squeezed my hand. You did it, she whispered. But it wasn't victory yet. This was the build, the setup, the tightening of the rope around the clipboard queen's final outburst. She stood one last time, breath ragged, eyes wild. You think you've beaten me? You think this neighborhood will be better without standards? She hissed. You're all destroying everything I built. But the room didn't follow her. The room didn't fear her. The room watched her fall apart. That was the moment I realized tomorrow wouldn't be about proving what she did. Tomorrow would be about ending what she'd become. The next morning rose gray and heavy, the kind of muted dawn that made Lakeside Summit Grove feel suspended between storm and silence. Word of the previous night's hearing had spread faster than wildfire, neighbors whispering on sidewalks, phones buzzing nonstop, doorbells chiming with quiet check-ins. Everyone felt it. Tonight would decide the fate of Valerie Hensley, and by extension, the future of the neighborhood she'd ruled like a private fiefdom. I stood on the cul-de-sac with Jacob, reviewing the sequence of evidence we'd present in the final session. He paced the pavement with military precision, as if preparing for a tactical briefing. Maya sat on our porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, a quiet determination glowing behind her tired eyes. You ready for tonight? Jacob asked without looking up. Ready, I said. But you and I both know she'll come swinging. She's cornered, he replied. That makes her dangerous. Almost on cue, the enforcer in crimson appeared at the end of the street. Her red blazer looked unnaturally bright against the overcast sky, like a flare of defiance refusing to burn out. She walked briskly, heels cracking against the concrete with a deliberate rhythm, each step a warning, a threat, a final attempt at dominance. She stopped several yards away, lifting her chin. Enjoying your moment of glory, she said, voice dripping with poison. Jacob stepped forward, but I touched his arm. Let her talk. Valerie's eyes narrowed. You think last night broke me? You think one trembling maintenance, tech, and one emotional presentation is enough to undo 8 years of service? You have no idea how the board works. The clipboard queen leaned closer, lowering her voice. I built this place. I decide how it runs. And I'm not going anywhere. But her voice lacked its usual force. It shook. Barely, but enough. She wasn't threatening us. She was trying to convince herself. She stormed off before I could reply, leaving the scent of cheap perfume and desperation in her wake. Jacob exhaled slowly. She's spinning, hard. She feels the ground shifting, I said. She's trying to claw it back. Inside, I spent the next 3 hours piecing together tonight's strategy. Briggs emailed a final checklist. Safety code precedents, HOA liability statutes, recordings of Daniel's testimony, and my expert breakdown of fire pattern data. Every document pointed in one direction: misuse of authority, negligence, and aggravated endangerment. But what made the officer of rules most vulnerable wasn't the evidence. It was the neighborhood's awakening. By late afternoon, residents gathered in driveways, talking in low but passionate voices. Some exchanged worried glances, others pointed toward the community center. A few approached Maya with heartfelt whispers. "We're praying for you. You're so strong, we won't let her hurt anyone else." Across the street, Valerie watched from her porch. Her once commanding posture had shifted, shoulders drawn inward, movements stiff. She wasn't the tyrant in heels anymore. She was a leader watching her kingdom crumble grain by grain. At 6, the sky dimmed. Chairs scraped across wooden floors inside the community center as people settled in early. Jacob escorted Maya to a front seat while I met Briggs backstage. The air buzzed with tension. "This is the final phase," Briggs said. "After tonight, the board decides immediate suspension and potential removal." "She'll try to interrupt." "She'll try," he agreed, "but she won't succeed." We positioned ourselves, Briggs at the podium, me near the display board, Daniel sitting stiffly along the wall. His hands fidgeted in his lap, but his eyes were resolved. He'd crossed the line of no return. The doors slammed open. Valerie swept in, hair immaculate, face contorted with brittle fury. She clutched a thick binder, no doubt filled with selective rules, outdated bylaws, and twisted interpretations she hoped to weaponize. She stopped in the aisle, turning slowly to face the room. "Before this farce continues," she began, voice trembling with indignation, "I intend to speak." Briggs didn't look up. "You will wait your turn." "I will not be silenced in my own meeting." "You forfeited the right to lead this meeting the moment you put a resident in harm's way," Briggs said sharply. "Sit down." Gasps rippled through the room. Valerie hesitated, just for a second, but the hesitation was everything. A defeated queen deciding whether to continue the performance or finally collapse. She sat. Not gracefully, not defiantly. She fell into the chair like someone bracing for impact. Briggs gestured to me. "Mr. Colwood, please begin the final phase of your presentation." I stepped to the front as every voice faded to silence. The room leaned forward. Even Valerie, silent now, watched with wide, tense eyes. This wasn't the confrontation. This was the setup, the positioning, the moment before the final strike. By the time I finished outlining the last segment of evidence, the energy in the room had changed. People weren't confused or conflicted anymore. They understood, and they were ready for what came next. Tonight wasn't about proving Valerie's guilt. Tonight was about ending her reign. The community center pulsed with a tension so thick it felt alive. Folding chairs packed every corner, the air buzzing with whispers that melted into silence the moment Valerie Hensley stood to adjust her blazer. The enforcer in crimson had returned to her signature color tonight, as if the red fabric could somehow resurrect the authority she'd been losing inch by inch. But the room wasn't bending toward her anymore. It was bending toward the truth. Briggs tapped the microphone. "We'll now move into the public confrontation portion of the review meeting." His voice carried the steadiness of a judge who had already read the verdict, but was giving everyone a chance to breathe before delivering it. The murmurs died instantly. I stepped forward, my evidence binder tucked under my arm. Maya sat in the front row beside Jacob, still wrapped in a soft sling, her posture straight, unwavering. Even injured, she radiated a quiet strength that put cracks into Valerie's stare. "This section," Briggs continued, "allows residents to voice statements, concerns, or direct experiences related to the incident and overall board conduct." Valerie released a sharp, almost feral laugh. "Oh, wonderful," she muttered. "A stage for the ungrateful." Several neighbors shot her disgusted glances. That was my cue. I approached the podium. "Before anyone speaks," I said, "I need to make something clear. None of this is personal vengeance. None of this is about settling scores. This is about safety, accountability, and what leadership should look like." Valerie stood abruptly. "Leadership?" she hissed. "You don't know the first thing about leadership." I turned slowly to face her. "Leadership doesn't set a blowtorch on its neighbors." A wave of gasps swept across the room. The clipboard queen's jaw tightened. "You twist everything. You manipulate facts. I wanted compliance, not chaos. You burn my wife." Her mouth opened, but nothing escaped. For the first time, Every eye in the room was locked on her, not with admiration or fear, but with a collective, unspoken question. How far would she have gone if nobody stopped her? Briggs called the first resident. A woman from Elm Court stood, clutching her hands tightly. Valerie fined my husband for having a ladder visible during roof repairs. Valerie scoffed. The bylaws clearly— Let her finish, Briggs warned. The woman swallowed. But when we showed her the section that said emergency repairs were exempt, she threatened to double the fine for attitude. We paid it. We always paid it. Her voice cracked. Because we were scared. A man from Willow Bend stood next. She told me my disabled son's ramp was a visual disruption and needed board approval. Board approval for a ramp. The officer of rules rolled her eyes, but her shoulders curled inward. Another neighbor rose, then another, each telling their own story. Small abuses, intimidation, selective rule enforcement, threats, petty retaliation, public shaming. Every testimony stacked another brick onto the mountain, pressing down on Valerie's composure. By the fifth resident, the tyrant in heels wasn't even pretending to take notes. She stared at the floor, her hands clutching her binder so tightly the plastic cover warped. Then Briggs motioned to Daniel. The room shifted into complete silence. Daniel stood slowly, trembling but resolute. I worked maintenance under Ms. Hensley for 3 years, he began, voice barely above a whisper. And I'm ashamed that I stayed quiet so long. Valerie snapped her head up. Daniel, don't you dare. He lifted his hand. She froze. She pushed us, he said. Every time something broke, every time a homeowner asked questions, every time safety came up, she pushed us to ignore it, told us to fix it on paper, not in practice. The enforcer in crimson faltered backward into her chair. Daniel continued. But the night she burned Maya, she ignored every warning, every single one. And when it happened, she told me to say it was an accident. His voice cracked. I'm done being scared. Maya reached out from the front row, whispering, Thank you. Briggs nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. The room remained silent for several long seconds, until Valerie abruptly stood, slamming her binder onto the desk so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. You're all pathetic, she snarled. Weak, ungrateful. I kept this place from turning into chaos. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. I stepped forward before Briggs could respond. No, I said quietly. Without you, this neighborhood might finally heal. Gasps rose again. Valerie's face twisted, a mixture of rage and crumbling desperation. Briggs tapped the microphone. The board will now recess for a private vote. Everyone remained seated. Valerie sank into her chair, chest heaving. Her kingdom had become a courtroom. Her subjects had become witnesses. And tonight, her power would be stripped in front of all of them. The board disappeared into the small conference room behind the stage, the door shutting with a hollow, echoing thud that carved a quiet trench across the community center. The crowd remained seated, a hush rippling through the air as if everyone understood the gravity of the moment. Valerie Hensley sat stiffly in the front row, her fingers digging into the warped binder she'd been clinging to all night. The enforcer in crimson looked smaller than she ever had, almost fragile beneath the bright red blazer she once weaponized like armor. Maya shifted beside me, wincing slightly as she adjusted her sling. It's almost over, she whispered, hope threading through her voice. Jacob nodded from her other side, eyes locked on Valerie. It's over the moment they call her name, he muttered. The clipboard queen must have felt the eyes on her because she suddenly sat up straighter. Don't act like I'm finished, she hissed under her breath, not looking at anyone. Boards make mistakes, people backtrack, fear makes them weak. Her voice trembled. Even she heard the desperation. I leaned forward. You burned someone, Valerie, I said quietly. Nobody backtracks from that. She flinched as if the words struck her physically. The tyrant in heels turned away, blinking rapidly, jaw clenching in a rhythm that spoke of a woman unraveling stitch by stitch. Minutes stretched like hours. Residents whispered in clusters. Children peeked in from the hallway. Briggs paced near the stage, reviewing notes he already knew by heart, and I felt something inside me crack. Not anger, not triumph, something heavier, something final. When the door opened, the room snapped upright. 3 board members stepped out, faces pale but resolute. Briggs approached the podium. "Thank you for your patience," he began. After reviewing evidence, statements, witness accounts, and documented safety violations, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Valerie rose before he could continue. "This is a witch hunt," she barked. "A coordinated smear." "Ms. Hensley," Briggs interrupted calmly, "please remain silent." She froze, completely. Briggs opened a folder, revealing the formal resolution. Effective immediately, Valerie Hensley is removed from her position as HOA board president and suspended indefinitely from all board activities, pending further investigation by county authorities. The room exploded, cheers, gasps, relieved sighs blending into a wave of long-denied justice. Valerie stumbled back into her chair, face draining of color. The officer of rules blinked again, as if waiting for the world to correct itself. "No," she breathed. "No, you can't. This isn't—" Her voice cracked violently. "You need me. You don't understand what you're doing." Briggs lowered the paper. "We understand perfectly." Jacob stood, his presence filling the front of the room. "You hurt my daughter," he said quietly, "and you thought you'd walk away from it." Valerie's breath shuddered. I didn't mean... It wasn't..." She couldn't finish. Every word fell apart before reaching her lips. Maya looked at her, not with victory, but with something almost sorrowful. "You could have just apologized," she whispered. "You could have been human." Valerie shook her head violently, as if the very concept repulsed her. "Weakness," she spat. "Compassion is weakness." "No," I said softly. "Abuse is weakness." 2 deputies approached her. She didn't resist, but she didn't accept it either. She walked stiffly between them, her chin lifting in one last attempt at dignity. It didn't hold. Her shoulders collapsed halfway down the aisle, and the clipboard queen looked back at the community she'd once controlled. Not a single person stood for her. Not one. When the doors closed behind her, an exhale rolled through the room, a collective release from years of tension nobody had admitted to carrying. Briggs turned toward me, extending his hand. "Your analysis made the difference," he said. "You gave the board clarity when they needed it most." I shook his hand. She gave them the reason. Outside, the night air was cool and strangely peaceful. The streetlights cast soft halos across the sidewalk as neighbors gathered around Maya, offering gentle hugs, warm words, and the kind of support that had been missing for too long. I wrapped my arm around her. "How's the shoulder?" "Hurts," she admitted, smiling faintly. But seeing her walk out hurt less. Jacob joined us, hands in his pockets. "Justice," he said, "isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just... right." Before the moment could fade, I turned toward the camera with a steady breath. "If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny," I said softly, "hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from." The neighborhood behind me glowed under warm porch lights, and for the first time since moving here, it finally felt like home.